Welcome to Clocking Out, brought to you by Career Minds. I'm your host, Raymond Lee. This episode is officially the launch of my podcast with the very personal story of my mom, who most of you all know is the reason why I'm here with you today. This podcast is a dedication to my mom, her life, and her personal journey. As many of you all know, my mom's not here with us today to tell her own personal story. So my friend and fellow podcaster, Steve Meller, is going to do the honors of interviewing my mom through the eyes of me, her son. So here we go with my mom's personal story of clocking out. All right, Steve, here we are, episode 3.
Episode 3, and if people don't know, we've done this in one sitting. This is the marathon of all marathons right here. So we're in the final third of the marathon. So we've both broken a sweat. We're both hydrated. We're doing all right.
Yeah, episode 3. So this episode, so we did part 1 and part 2. This episode is a very unique episode from my perspective because it's the dedication of this whole podcast, Clocking Out, which is to my mom. Barbara Thetty Hester is her name. And I don't know about you, Steve, but have you ever, I think, for those who are listening here, my mom passed back in November of 2012. And, when I think about the topic of the podcast and clocking out, she's someone who really, from my perspective, set the stage for what it means to clock out of a career to pursue ultimate career fulfillment. And this podcast is about her life, her story. And, I'm going to really tell the story through my mom's eyes. But my question to you, Steve, is have you ever had a guest who's someone where it's like, they're a guest of, sort of, through someone else's eyes versus the live person themselves?
I haven't, no, and that's why I think this is such a it's so unique, it's so special, it's so touching, it's so beautiful in regards to the fact that in so many ways your mom is the first guest. It's the first person who's actually going to be whose career and career growth and career trajectory, all these kind of things, decision making throughout that process, which is at the heart of this whole show, the whole mission and the whole purpose of the show. While you've obviously done that through the first couple of episodes, I think it's just beautiful that your mom, rest in peace, is able to be that focus now for the next 30 or so minutes, and for us to learn so much of the mission and the purpose behind why you wrote the book Clocking Out, and then obviously why you're now doing the show too. I think it's amazing, and I'm very excited to kind of get it from this sort of almost third party perspective of someone who is the actual guest on the show, I guess.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. It is certainly, she is my first guest, and it is super special. And let's jump right in.
Let's jump right in, man. So tell us about mom. Like, who is she? And the beautiful part about this as well is that, I know the formula that you're trying to create with the show, and every guest that comes on is going to be able to tell us about their upbringing, where it all originated, where it all started, etc. So let's give your mom that same highlight here. What's her story? Where did it all begin?
Yeah, so my mom, like me, she was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, February 8th, 1952. She was born as Barbara Ann Lee, Barbara Ann, like the song. And she is the type of person who is a creator. She was very creative. She played the piano. She loved to write. She had a desire to want to be a school teacher. And, she went to school at a Catholic school in New Orleans, Louisiana, called Mount Carmel Academy. And, she had this desire to want to be a school teacher, and she was a great student. She made great grades. And, she ended up in her senior year, she had my dad, who she was dating at the time, really young in high school, ended up finding herself pregnant. And when I think about the first major decision that my mom was faced with, I can only imagine. I never had this conversation with her, by the way. But when I reflect back when she was 19 years old, just graduating as a high school student from a Catholic high school in New Orleans, coming up from a very traditional Catholic upbringing, the first major decision that she was faced with of, am I going to have this kid or not? Mm-hmm. And sure. It's a pretty, humbling sort of, just to think about that. And so, obviously, she had me. And by the way, I never actually did the math until 10 years later. My brother one day we were hanging out and he's like, hey, by the way, did you know that, mom and dad were pregnant to you before they got married? And I was like, geez, Dave, thanks for sharing that. I actually never did the math. He's like, yeah, go back and do the math. My parents, that's not something that you actually tell unless anyway, I just thought that was kind of funny, but she loved her kids. As I mentioned, my parents separated. So my mom ended up having me, and my mom and dad got married. And then 8 years later, they grew apart, and, she quickly grew up, when she took custody of my brother and I, and she was a school teacher. She was an English teacher at a small Catholic school. But she had to make her first big career decision because, she's now taking care of two boys who have incredibly big appetites and like to wear fashionable clothes. I think I went to my mom one day and I said, I'd like to get some Jordache jeans. You ever wear Jordache?
No, I think you might be dating yourself right now.
I probably am. But, I think my mom realized very early on that it was going to cost a lot to take care of my brother and I.
Right.
But she was determined. She was determined to, raise her kids, take care of her kids in a way that, provided for the things that she never had growing up. And so she decided that she was going to leave working as an English teacher and went to court reporting school. Now, mind you, she knew nothing about court reporting, right? But in the research that she had done, that court reporting is a lucrative career. She can make a lot of money. And she was determined to take care of her kids. And so she pivoted, went to court reporting school, ended up becoming a certified stenographer, which is a court reporter, and got a job at a firm in New Orleans and started doing court reporting, probably around 25 years old, I would say. Yeah. And worked as a court reporter for almost 30 years while she was raising us.
Right. And I definitely want to pause the story there because right here we are now handed with something that I know is so important to you with the show is this notion of, and again, if you didn't listen to the first couple of episodes, I do believe this is going to be an episode that stands alone, that you wouldn't necessarily have to listen to the first two episodes, but going back to the first episode that we recorded of yourself, and for you to be handed a similar situation around a not too different age, very different circumstances, but fairly similar age, to make a decision that your mom made at that time for the good of her family and putting her own dreams, again, I don't think that's too big of a word, her own dreams from a career standpoint to one side. How much of that was, or as opposed to saying how much of that was obvious to you, when was that obvious to you? Did it ever become obvious to you that she had made, in many ways, the ultimate sacrifice from a career standpoint for the good of her family?
It became clear at the end of her journey. When she passed in 2012, and she ultimately left court reporting to pursue her dream of archaeology, it became apparent that, she made that pivot into court reporting primarily to take care of her family. She couldn't she couldn't do it on a teacher salary alone. And so, she put her own dreams and aspirations aside to go down a career path of 20 years in order to pay for our school, pay for our, everything that you would have to pay for as a parent to provide for the right kind of life that you want for your children. She put that on hold.
Yeah. And a couple of the things as well, it's hard not to pull a little bit from your story through the first 2 episodes, but you speak a lot about your own character and how your mom taught you so much about character through her life and through your upbringing. And here we are with the ultimate display of character. So you're telling us that for 30 years, for the most part, she was able to keep it a secret based on her attitude, based on her demeanor, her whole approach to her career, to providing for her boys, that you wouldn't have known necessarily. You wouldn't have necessarily known that this was someone that was doing something at the cost of what she truly wanted to be doing. I mean, what does that say about, from a character standpoint, what doesn't that say? It says just about everything, right?
It totally does. It's a great call out because, she was selfless. Like, she genuinely put other people first. She always put the needs of others first. And I think that connection to the character where, I feel like that's what's allowed me to get to where I am today. It's that mindset that my mom had, in her life that certainly contributed to that. But yeah, she never shared anything with us, in terms of why she was doing what she was doing. She was just disciplined. She worked hard, provided for us. And, we were, it was a stable upbringing with my mom. And she was, I call her, she was the rock.
It's, what's interesting now is that you now have all this hindsight to look back on, and maybe you're able to look back and pinpoint a few moments where, if I was paying more close attention, and maybe I could have seen this or that. But I know in the writing of your book, you did a lot of research. You went back and you asked people that, who it was that she worked with, what she was known for, what she was good at. And I'd love to shed some light on that. I think it's so important, because to do something for 30 years is one thing, but she did it successfully. She was good at what she did, that came across in the book. And so for me, I'm curious, like, what did you learn maybe about some of those skills and soft skills or hard skills, whatever it might be? What was it about the way she was able to do that job for so long that made her successful at it for 3 decades?
Yeah. Well, there was a 2-part in there. So when she started as a court reporter, she worked for a firm for probably the first 10 or 12 years. And the role in her current job was they would send her out to depositions, 10 a day, and they were billing her out to law firms. And she did that for about over a decade. She realized very quick, well, I shouldn't say very quickly, but she realized that if she did it on her own, she would end up keeping significantly more money than if she would have worked for a firm. And so she made the decision probably about 10 years in, when she got a ton of experience, to go out on her own and start her own business. And so she actually partnered with someone else, and they started their own court reporting firm. And she ended up, she was her own boss. And she said, you know what, I'm not going to work for anyone anymore. I'm going to start my own. She made the pivot, and we actually watched that transformation happen. And so while she didn't like the work of a court reporter over time, and it's, it's tough, you have to sort of think about the demand of, working for a law firm where you do these depositions and you're a stenographer and you're sitting in a room and you hear a deposition of someone. Attorneys want the results of that deposition in like 24 hours time. So it's always a pressure cooker. The deadlines were, always 24 hours. And so she needed to find, in her mindset, if I had my own business, then I could find my own clients. I wouldn't be forced through this firm to go do depositions with attorneys who had unrealistic expectations. And so, the first thing that I saw was that, when something's not going right, you have the choice. You have a choice where you can continue going down the path of doing what you're doing, working for the firm and continuing with these unrealistic deadlines, or you can choose to go down a different path. And my mom chose a different path of working for herself and saying, you know what, I'm not going to work for this attorney. I'm going to work for these attorneys who take care of me and really appreciate the work that I do. And so the first, there's a number of traits that I would say, I love about my mom, but the one that really was vivid is the fact that I was probably, at that time, 14 or 15 years old, maybe around that time, maybe a little bit older. She made the choice of going out on her own. And I think about, sort of my journey and choices that I've made. I think that trait, certainly attributed to some of the decisions that I made along my journey.
Yeah. And we have really in the show, arguably the first example of what it means to say, listen, I'm looking at the circumstances of the situation I'm in with my career. And in your mom's case, while it was like, listen, the smart thing to do right now is not to just completely, wipe the slate clean, start fresh in a brand new career, brand new skill set. She was at least able to say, hey, is there anything about this I can control? Is there anything about this I can make better? And she's able to say, I can actually still apply this same skill set, but I can do it on my terms. I can do it on my terms. I can optimize, the results of what I'm doing. I mean, I'd have to assume that while I'm sure she was still extremely busy, she at least felt as though she had more control to be a mom, to have all these things in her life that meant so much to her. She had even more capacity to do those to the best of her ability as well, right?
Yeah. Now, you're absolutely right. And when I think about like the phases of her choices and the decisions that she made, that first choice where she went out on her own, I believe gave her the confidence to make the next big choice, which was ultimately to seek fulfillment. And that choice was to go back to school. Yeah. And I think when she positioned herself in a place where she went for the first 10 years where she was working for a firm where she had absolutely no control over time, she was working 12-hour days, was absolutely miserable. She made that choice and the decision to pull herself out of that. She started her own business. She had the control and the decisions and the choices around who her clients were going to be, which ultimately, years later, provided her the flexibility and opportunity to go back to school, which she ultimately did. She enrolled herself into a master's degree program at the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg. And she went to school, Steve, one night a week, one class a semester. She started at the age of 50. And over a 10-year journey, she ended up graduating with her master's degree in archaeology from the University of Southern Mississippi. But it was that choice that she made and that investment in her time while she was running her business. She knew that in the back of her mind, I'm not going to do this forever. And so while she made that decision to go out on her own and position herself in a place where she can select her own clients, in the back of her mind, she started investing in that future that was going to bring her fulfillment. And so she started making those incremental investments in herself each semester, where she would drive an hour or so up to school one night a week, take one class. And and it was a beautiful thing seeing her graduate with her master's degree.
Yeah, she wasn't my mom, and it's an emotional. I'm getting emotional listening to the story, and for me, she's epitomizing controlling the controllables, because so many people can hear this story and say, "Gosh, this lady doesn't have many options here. Like she doesn't. She's kind of been handed this hand, and she's got to do something with it." And where there was even just a shed of light of control, she inserted herself into it. That's what I'm hearing here. It's just like, if she could find one day and one night and one class per semester, even if it's just one, how can I just keep hitting those singles? How can I keep hitting those singles over, if it has to be over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, just keep hitting those singles that I can actually control. And lo and behold, all those singles, they add up, and they add up to graduation, and they add up to this ability to then go on and do what she wanted to do to find fulfillment. I'd love for you to tell us that part of the story too.
Yeah, it's, as you're saying that, it gives me goosebumps because, I think about our journey and the impact of how COVID impacted our journey. And a similar parallel in her journey is she went to school for almost 10 years. She was taking one class a semester. She was working grueling hours as a court reporter, has her own business, really super busy. And it was 10 years later when Hurricane Katrina hit. And I think a lot of people think of, Katrina and the impact it had on New Orleans with the flooding. But the actual hurricane hit the Mississippi Gulf Coast. So Biloxi, Mississippi is really, Biloxi Gulfport is where the hurricane impacted, and that's where she was living at the time. And, the hurricane hit, it decimated the entire Mississippi Gulf Coast. And a few years later, she found herself with this incredible opportunity where the city of Biloxi commissioned the University of Southern Mississippi to conduct an archaeological dig on the coast of a French colonial burial site that had become exposed as a result of this hurricane. And the scholars, the teachers from University of Southern Mississippi said to my mom, she was in her last semester before graduation, they said, "We want you to lead this dig." And obviously she said yes. They set up the site. It was right off the beach in Mississippi. My brother and I would go there and visit her, and there was all the students there, and they were digging, and it was pretty cool seeing some of the things that they had dug up. But she was living her dream, man. She really loved having a sifting tray, wearing her hat, having her little tools and things. But she had an incredible opportunity, and it was interesting that it was, it took a natural disaster for her to have this opportunity. But it was it was her final year of her semester, and it's ultimately what she wrote her thesis on, was the work that she had done at this burial site. And it ended up becoming her thesis, and she had written articles about it in journals. But it was this 10-year buildup of taking all of these classes that ultimately got to a place where she had this incredible opportunity to lead a project that had recognition from archaeologists from around the world, had local media attention. And I was really proud of my mom for that experience.
No doubt. And it's crazy, some of these stories that you hear like this of your mom are just, in so many ways, you're like, wow, 10 years of pursuing something like that to be able to graduate. But had she not done it that way, that whole story doesn't happen. Right. That whole story does. If she'd found a way to make it work in 3, 4, 5 years, she's probably not invited to go do that, and to have an opportunity like that, while it came from a huge disaster like the one that came. Here she is in her element, and she's waited a long time to get to that point.
Right.
But as you've alluded to already, obviously we have a sad ending. You lost your mom, obviously way too soon. But talk us through some of those later days and really what came from, upon graduation, what she was able to do in those final years of her life.
Yeah, it was. It was definitely. It was a hard time. She she did that. She did the dig, and I would say a couple months after that, she was experiencing a lot of pain in her neck, and she went in for a doctor's visit, and they did some scans, and ultimately she ended up with she had stage 4 lung cancer that had spread throughout her body, and you know, it was one of those where she just couldn't get ahead of it. Unfortunately, the time that I was able to spend with my mom around, you know, just reflecting on, you know, the things that, you know, she's been able to accomplish has been, you know, pretty remarkable. But, you know, the one story that just comes to mind is, you know, she, you know, a couple months later, she ended up passing. And I had written the book Clocking Out, had gotten published years later, where I talked about, you know, career fulfillment and seeking career fulfillment. My mom hadn't had the opportunity to, you know, read the book or be a part of the book, but the book got published after her passing. And the book was dedicated to my mom and her life. And there's a chapter in the book about my mom's life and her experience. And one day I was listening to Brene Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us. Yeah. And she had David Kessler as her guest. Now, David Kessler is he's the grief expert. And I didn't know about his work at the time. And so I was listening to this podcast. I was painting my living room at the time, Steve, and got my AirPods in, and I was painting the living room, and Brene says, "Oh, I'm going to welcome our guest today, David Kessler." And, you know, his book is titled Finding Meaning. And so I'm listening to Brene interview David Kessler, and David's talking about the 5 stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and how the 5th stage is acceptance. And David's book is Finding Meaning is the 6th stage of grief. And what he sort of describes in his book is that the stages don't end at acceptance, which is the 5th stage of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work. David said there's a 6th stage, which is called Finding Meaning. And, you know, when I think about my mom's story and the work that she's done throughout her career and making that, you know, she was shocking. Here we go. She was shocking the world from her archaeology work. When I was listening to that podcast, and I was listening to David Kessler describe Finding Meaning, I said, "Oh my God, my book, this work is around me finding meaning in my mom's life and my mom's work." And so that was the 6th stage. It wasn't just me ending with acceptance, you know, a few years later. It was writing the book and starting this podcast. But the crazy part of the story is after that podcast, I was sitting at my computer and I went to grief.com, David Kessler's website, and his book, Finding Meaning, ended up becoming a New York Times best-selling book. And he had his email address on there, and I sent him an email. I actually almost didn't send the email. I had it typed up. I was ready to go, and I was like, why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. But I wanted David to know what an impact his book had. I went to Audible. I downloaded it right away. I listened to his book. He has an amazing story. And just this whole idea of finding meaning just spoke to me in so many different ways. I emailed David Kessler and just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing, because this idea of finding meaning provided so much inspiration around the work that I'm doing. Sent the email. A couple of hours later, I'm doing my thing. I'm working, banging out emails. All of a sudden, my phone's ringing, and I look down, and it's from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. And so I grabbed my cell phone, and I was like getting ready to hit ignore and go about my day. I end up answering the call, and I said, he says, hey, this is David Kessler. And I said, I'm sorry, what? I said, this David Kessler? And he's like, yeah, you just sent me an email a little while ago. And I said, why are you calling me? He's like, yeah, I just figured I'd give you a call. He's like, tell me about your mom. And I was just like completely blown away.
Right.
And anyway, I just thought that was a really nice story, because he ultimately invited me on a show and helped me promote my book. And we talked about my mom, and, you know, that whole experience just really, sort of just grounded me in the work that I'm doing. Is, it's really all about sharing her life, her experience, and hopefully provide some inspiration to people who even find themselves late in their career at the age of 50, where they're just stuck or they're not happy in the work that they're doing. You know, you can make a choice and take a class a day or find something that could bring you inspiration, because ultimately, you know, you only have one life to live, right? And so, yeah.
Man, it's powerful stuff. This is the first time I'm hearing about that sixth phase of grief, and for me, immediately my mind just starts running in circles of just all these experiences and moments in my life where I think of people that have gone through similar things that could have really stood to have known that there's an opportunity to find meaning in what's happened here. And for you to now, through the book firstly, and now through this podcast, to be almost walking with that flame, with that candle of just, representing your mom and the spirit of her journey and the example that can create for people. Just to kind of wrap us up here with this third episode, I think it would be great. What does your mom's story just, I know you went into a little bit there, just explaining like, hey, it's never too late. It's never too late to make that shift. But what is it about your mom's story that, from your perspective, gives people that glimmer of hope, that maybe you're listening to this right now, and the whole reason why they've decided to start listening to Clocking Out is because they find themselves stuck. They find themselves lost. Like, what does your mom's story do for anybody listening right now to be that example that we all need in our lives?
Yeah. So I think about the concepts of ambition versus aspiration. And I think of, when you're doing something for ambition, it's ultimately around, what are you looking to achieve? You're ambitious. But when you think about aspiration, it's about, who's the person that you want to become?
Yeah.
Who are you looking to aspire to be? And what kind of impact do you want to make in the world? And I think, life is such a long journey, right? I think that you have to make decisions in life that you have to live in the now, right? And so for my mom, she had to make the decision of, I need to find a job that's going to support my family. And I may need to put some aspirations on hold because life's happening. And I would say that, everyone sort of has life happening at certain aspects, of their journey. But it's never too late to pursue your aspiration. If there's somebody that you want to become, that you aspire to be, that you're not currently fulfilled with today, that there's never a time where it's just too late. Yeah. You can always make the pivot. You can always make that choice, that, you have that choice, that decision to make the pivot. And my mom made that pivot. She made the choice to start going back to school and invest in herself. Her aspiration was going to be, I want to be an archaeologist and I want to live out my dream.
And so much of that aspiration story from your mom's account, which I hope people can see and connect to as well, is that the aspirational part was for her.
Yeah.
It was for her. And that's good. Just to be clear, folks, like a little bit of selfishness in our lives when it comes to us exploring our potential. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And so much of that ambition that your mom exemplified for that 30-year career, it speaks to ambitions that were incredibly selfless. Just like the selflessness of all of that to do what was required for so many others outside of herself. Really spoke to that ambition. I just wanted to make that abundantly clear because I think it would be, as someone who's just a fan of this story and just such an admirer of everything that your mom represented, I think it's important that people recognize that part of this too, is that from an aspirational standpoint, it may mean that you have to get a little selfish. And hey, folks, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. It really is.
Amen.
Brother, I appreciate you letting me spearhead your podcast out of the gates here, man. But I'm gonna have to pass the reins back to you now. So
yeah, Steve, thank you. I feel like this is a journey for me. As I said in the beginning, there's no formula here for becoming a podcaster, and you've been doing it a while. You have your own podcast show. The work that you do aligns with the work that we're doing, the work that I do around career fulfillment. So I'm super excited to learn about the career competitor and the work that you're doing. So look forward to the next episode and flipping the table here. So I have to take some notes on interviewing you.
That's right. I tried not to go too hard on you either because I felt like you would hold that against me and take it out on me. So go easy.
I will. Well, I read your book and I'm ready to go into it. So we'll awesome. Dive into that soon.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
I want to first say thank you to Steve for being such a great interviewer, interviewing my mom through the eyes of me, her son. I don't know if you've ever experienced gratitude for someone who's wholeheartedly put themselves first in everything that they've done throughout their life and has sacrificed their life in order for you to be successful. That's what my mom has done for me. Mom, I hope I've made you proud because you've certainly made me proud, and it brings me joy to bring your spirit to the world, to inspire others who, at some point in their career, if they're feeling stuck, they have the inspiration to make a choice, to make a change, and follow their dreams. So with that, this show couldn't be possible without the support of Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and leadership development services. You can learn more about Career Minds at careerminds.com. And finally, if you'd like to connect with me or ask me a question, you can find me on LinkedIn and on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your future or career, or think it's time for a change, ask yourself these 3 simple questions. Does my work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and others? Until next time.